Welcome, coordinators. We are going to give you a short walkthrough of the Every Child Accountability Tracking System, ECATS, that we are beginning to pilot with select districts across the state, or actually extended testing with select districts across the state this month. And as we move forward, we're going to try to align some of the pieces in this system with our 10 steps for the work around building a system of interventions. So you should be pretty familiar with those 10 steps, and we're going to try to talk to you a little bit about how the different components in the system align and help you do that work of building an intervention system as well as problem solving your core instruction. This is going to be very high level view of the system, so don't think that this is going to be the last time you see it, but we just want to give you some time to process through and begin having some conversations within this coordinator meeting about what you're going to see as it rolls out next school year. So if you remember, we talked about the steps for building an intervention system, and we start with, as you can see on here, ensuring your universal screening system is intact. So we've tried to give you lots of resources over the past few years to do that work around universal screening system, being not just one piece of data, but a system of assessments and data sources that will allow you to see how healthy your core instruction is, and then also identify those students and groups of students who may need more than core. So when we talk through these steps for the work, ensuring that universal screening system is intact is your first piece. And we've given you lots of Excel documents and things like that to try to put together multiple data sources to help you with that work. And now, as we roll out ECATS, you're going to see that this is a tool and a platform that's going to allow you to do that work much more easily, we feel like. So let's start with this. The first is ensuring that universal screening system is intact. So Amy Nichols from PCG is on this recording with us, and she's going to open up the system and begin by starting to show you some of those pieces of the early warning system that bring together many different pieces of data automatically so we can start problem solving. So we'll start with that. Amy?
So the first thing that we're going to do is talk through what you see when you first come to ECATS. And what I'm going to show you now is basically a dashboard on the main page. So when you log into the system, everybody will have the same menus, and based on your relationship to students, you'll have different menu items at the top of the screen. But below, we have some mini dashboards. So we're going to start with first, like, how are all of my schools doing? And then how are all of my grade levels doing? So what you see on the screen now are looking at the indicators for attendance, behavior, and literacy and math. We will have another one for academics for our 9th graders, 9 through 12. And what you see here is just an overview of one particular district and how the students are performing with these particular areas of need. So you see where folks are red octagons, or yellow squares, green circles, or even what we have for enrichment support, blue diamonds, for each of these areas. Then we move to a grade level view where we see the same type of information, but we see it based on the grade level of students. And so in this particular view, you have students in 1st through 5th grade, and we're looking at the different indicators for literacy, math, attendance, and behavior. This will tell you how many students are involved in this particular indicator if you do some hover overs. So now we're going to move into the early warning system. And with the early warning system, if you're on a particular site, this is now the site of what ECATS is going to look like. You start with clicking on early warning system, and it's going to remember where you last were. So I was in a particular literacy group last time I was in the site. But right now, what I prefer to do is just go to one particular classroom, and I'm going to go to the Gen Ed classroom. So when I go into a Gen Ed teacher, pretend that's this Mr. Test, he has 3 classes. And if I go into one of his classes, I'm going to see a group or a classroom roll up of all of the different areas. And so, again, this is elementary school. It's a test data, so you see academics here because there might be one test student in the high school. Otherwise, you wouldn't see this column if it was just elementary and middle school. But right now, these are the indicators for all 3 classes that Mr. Gen Ed Test teaches. If I go into one of those classes, now what I see would be, again, a roll-up of all of the students in the classroom at the top of the screen. But now I have a list of all the students. So notice how many clicks I had to go through in order to get to an individual student information. So now, starting with this particular early warning system, I have a lot of information all in one place, and it starts with understanding what those indicators are. So I'm going to scroll down. We have lots of different groups in this test class, so we'll scroll down to the key, and this is going to be on for every site. So if folks forget what a red rectangle means, it means that you need more intensive support for that particular student or that particular group of students. A yellow square, more strategic support, core support for the green circle, and then again, enrichment support for blue diamonds. If the student or if the group or class has a gray pentagon, that means that we just don't have any early warning system data for those indicators to fire. So it might be that you have a gray pentagon for a student that just enrolled within the last week. We are getting most of our data from PowerSchool, and it would take probably 2 nights in order to get all of the data once the student's been enrolled and within PowerSchool.
So if we want to kind of relate this back again to those 10 steps, so if you scroll all the way back up to the top, Amy, we always start every screen with kind of how that whole group is doing. And so that's how we want you to begin your problem solving, is ensuring that universal screening system is intact, which is this is doing some of that work for you by bringing in that data. And we'll talk about what data is being brought in. But then in addition, we also want you to determine through our data decision rules kind of what is the percentage of students who are at risk and how should we address that risk. So our risk thresholds for each individual student are set from our level. So we will be setting those risk thresholds, and we can go into more of that in our conversation and coordinator meeting about that. We'll go ahead and give you those early warning system threshold handouts during this meeting. But we'll go, when we think about risk, we know that a student is at risk. It doesn't matter what district or what school they're in. We know from research what risk means for students, for attendance, behavior, and academic skill areas. So we provide that risk level, but what your job as coordinators and throughout your district will be talking to your schools about how do we address that risk. So if you look up at the top at that roll up where we see MTSS demo for attendance, behavior, literacy, and math, we see that for attendance and behavior, 82% of kids are on target in this group. So that's pretty good. That means that 82% of kids are not in the risk range. But then for literacy and math, you see that only 52% of kids are meeting those risk targets. So we would say there, we may need to make sure that we're problem solving core at the same time as we're matching students to supplemental intervention. So we'll talk more about that. So we talked about ensuring the universal screening system is intact. And then we actually skip down to number 3, which is building those data decision rules. So we built those data decision rules for risk for you to determine who's at risk. But again, what you will have to do is start guiding your schools towards how do we address that risk. If there's a large number of kids, then we want you to address that risk first at core. So then, in that collecting the universal data, like Amy said, most of those pieces are being brought in through PowerSchool. For the academic areas, we are partnering with 8 different vendors that you've designated to us as the most common universal screening and progress monitoring sources. And so that data will be brought in automatically by PCG into the system. And we'll talk more about those risk thresholds, but they're basically set on what the vendor has told us they determine to be risk. In addition, we're bringing in EOG and EOC data and grades and a few other pieces. So that collecting the data, your job in that is making sure that the data is accurate that's going in. So things like office discipline referral data, attendance data will feed in from PowerSchool, but the conversations you need to begin having are making sure that data is accurate, because if it's not accurate, it's not going to, that symbol that you saw in the early warning system doesn't mean a whole lot if the data coming in is not accurate. So then if we want to kind of go back to number 2, the next thing that PCG will be asking as you opt into the system is what are the intervention protocols that you have designed for your schools and across your district so that they can preload those into the system. So if you remember from Module 2, we really want you to have a good idea and well thought out intervention matrices completed for those major areas across grade spans using those flow charts. And so what we have asked that be loaded into the system is what you have designated as your standard protocol, and then you'll also have some places to build in how you plan to intensify for students who need that most intensive intervention. So if Amy wants to go back in, then we can start talking about how we then do intervention planning in the software based on what you've asked to be loaded in for your intervention matrices.
So if a student has something going on within the indicator with the hover over, you can see right away what's driving that indicator to be a yellow square in this case, or in the math case for Amy, what's pulling in specifically to indicate that she needs a more intensive support.
Can you also just show how, in addition, you can do those expansion columns so you can see more discrete data, some pieces that feed into the indicator, and then some pieces that are also just more information there for you. And then what Amy's showing you now is that you can sort by those expansion columns. So if you wanted to quickly identify at the top all those students who are below on iReady, if that's the screener that you're using. Again, we're not paying for any of those screeners, but PCG will load the ones in there for you. So your regional consultant will give you that list of the.
All right, so I'm going to pretend that Jennifer and Angel and Angie all need a plan, and I'm doing that because they're yellow squares. Prior to this, I would have already done some problem solving before selecting these students, but in this class, this is how we'll demonstrate it. I do want to mention that you can create plans for larger groups of students, or for one student at a time, in that rare case. So we've selected students, and now I can create a plan. The button up here shows up only when I select students. You can't create a plan with no students. You always have to have a student. So in this case, the next section is choosing your area of need. And when you choose your area of need, take into consideration attendance. If we were looking at attendance and it was a concern, we would make sure that we would address that concern under behavior and social emotional. But for today's purposes, we are doing a literacy plan. And it's going to need just looking at supplemental support. And the next thing that we're going to do is look at whether or not the team has done the problem solving. And then we're making that justification. Really, there's only 2 reasons why you're making an intervention plan. You're either moving a student from intensive support to supplemental, then they would need less support. But in this case, these students need additional support. I can actually write more notes here. We just want to make sure that since this is a group plan, we've selected more than one student, we would never want to add student names here. Even if it is a student plan for one student, we don't want to add student names here because in the future, you might have another student that has a similar need to that intervention plan, and you can group students together, even if a plan already exists. So we'd never want to use student names here. So now we want to make sure that we understand what specific area that we're going to be working in, and these folks need some help with written expression. So once we've selected that specific area of need, now we understand whether we're going to use standard treatment protocol or a custom intervention plan. And this is where we would want to use your intervention matrices to be able to populate within ECATS so that this would show up automatically for your interventionist. So notice here, we're going to have instructional practices. We have our written expression. In this case, we can't go any further until we understand when we actually started this intervention. And for our purposes, we're going to say, yeah, we started it earlier. We didn't have time to actually stick it into the technology to document it, but we really did start March 12th. So when we hit save the date, automatically what populates is that example intervention. As Amy mentioned, we're not advocating, we're intervention agnostic. So we have that intervention. You already let us know what the frequency and duration was for this particular situation and how many students would be an appropriate group size. This can be, even though it's a standard treatment protocol, you may want to edit. There is that option. And automatically then you look at what standard progress monitoring tool was selected as part of that standard treatment protocol. Again, we don't want to be endorsing anything. So in this particular scenario, we do have a teacher-made literacy assessment. So this is where you would put your other vendors. If you are using certain vendors, you would add those. They would be added here, and this information would be imported. But for this case, since it's teacher-made, we now have a situation where we're adding some baseline and target score information for this case. And so we're going to look at the plan. We're going to actually review the plan at the end of April. So when we set that target date, it's going to be set for all students. But the baseline date could have actually been different for all of these students based on when they were tested this particular area. I'm just making up information now for fast input. We'll put it where we want them all to have the same target score, but notice that they can all have different target scores, even though they're in the same plan. And we can also indicate whether or not we're progress monitoring off grade level. So if you're using the same intervention and you're using the same particular progress monitoring tool, but you're using a different grade level, then you can indicate that here. So I'm just going to go up here and indicate instructional practices. We're still working through this with our system and with DPI. So we now can have a button that says finalize plan. So now the entire plan has been created. And at this time, we can go back in and modify the plan. We can add progress monitoring data. We can look at the growth of the students over time. If we had imported scores, all of the imported scores that we have, that might be if you started the intervention earlier, we might have scores within the system to be actually plotted on the graph. But in this case, they were teacher-made, so we have no plots on the graph. So Amy, what would we like to do next?
So I just want to point out to our folks in the field that as you can see, this goes right along with how we want you to examine your data for groups of students that are receiving a similar or same intervention. So we, just like in the beginning, we want you to look at your early warning system data and think about how the whole district, whole school, whole grade, whole class are doing before we dive into individual students. We'll also, in these group plans that we've created for this group of students, be able to see on the same screen each of their progress monitoring graphs to see how they're doing. And then what will also be up above that's still in development is a lovely little pie chart that'll tell us the percentage of students in this group that are on target or on track. So then you can quickly see, and that will also print on the document, if Angel Test here in this group is not making progress, well, how is the entire group of students receiving this intervention progressing? So we'll have that. And then it is populating our progress monitoring data. As you put in progress monitoring data, you'll see a trend line populate there after 6 data points. After at least 6 data points, a trend line will populate on the graph, so you can easily see how that student is progressing towards their goal. And then up there where Amy has on this screen, you see on track, not enough data. That's going to give you, as data is put in, it'll give you an indication of, is the student making appropriate progress or not appropriate progress as well. And then it'll also have a rate of improvement there. And then if Amy goes over to that little 63% triangle, what's also been put into the system is some more ability to log interventions. And so based on your logging of interventions, then you can see the percentage of that intervention that was delivered, basically the dosage. If you've said that that student is going to receive 20 minutes 3 times a week and only 20 minutes 1 time a week was delivered, then that percentage is going to end up being about 33%. If it was delivered or logged the way that it was specified in the plan, then that would be at 100%. So that recalculates every time throughout the life of the intervention based on what the student was supposed to have received.
So when we think about intervention logging, we are logging interventions up here, and the intervention information is here. Notice that I can't edit this information, and so we're going to log interventions. So yes, we do want to leave. We're going to go to the intervention screen and look at how we can group log. So up here we have group logging, and I'll just click on that. And now what we have are a list of information where we're going to put, oh, when did we do this intervention logging? We did it last Thursday. We did it with a high priority. And if you notice here the duration of interventions, you have hours or minutes. Don't make my mistake and put 22 hours when you really meant 22 minutes. And even though we're thinking about this group logging wizard, I'm showing you this because there are a few times when you have groups of 30 or more kids, and this is an easy way to log for all students. You come back in before you save anything and customize for any of those students. And so we'll do group sizes of 3, even if you're logging for 50 students. Remember, these are students that are grouped together because they have similar needs. But you probably didn't provide those interventions all together in that group of 30 or more students. So you can look at the group size from that perspective. You can make a comment for all students, and you can spell that correctly. And you then check which intervention applies for that particular logging. And so now what you have is an intervention log for all of the students. So Angel, Jennifer, and that other student, whose name is Angie. And so then we can go in and I can say, Angie really didn't have a good day. I'm going to say, okay day. And you can edit that.
And if I can interrupt real quick, I think an exciting use of this portion, what you could do is we've always had trouble keeping track a lot of times if you're using a sequenced intervention curriculum, which is what we would want you to do, like keeping track of where that group is in the segment of in the sequence of lessons, and how individual students are progressing through that, just in case someone else needs to pick up that group for you. So this is a great place to document those things, so that we're actually keeping track of kind of how those students are progressing through that particular intervention curriculum. So that's just a little aside.
Thank you. And so in this case, let's look at Jennifer. What we can do is, even though we group logged her, we can put a 0 here, and we can say actually absent. And that'd be a quick way to do that with the group logging. And so we've done something for all 3 students now, and when we hit save all, it's going to ask us to confirm, and we'll read through that and we'll confirm that. So now we have that logged in our system. If we go back to the early warning system, remember, it's going to remember where we were. And so then what we're going to do is go down to the last plan that we created, which is the written expression group. Go to that plan page. And we can see Angie's more on track, right? It changed from 60-something to 93%. Or Angel, sorry. And then Angie is 31%. She was absent. And then Jennifer was still at 60. So with just updating that one log, it updates in real time for the intervention percentage of logging.
That's awesome.
So whether or not we have progress up here or not, you can do a plan review at any time. And what pops up for this is the student's information. And then you have questions. And Amy, I might have you more about this.
So when we look at these 4 questions, when we're reviewing this plan, we want to make sure that you understand, as we've spoken about in the training and how we expect the structures to be set up, that this would be taking place during a team meeting. Either, a lot of times this is done within a PLC, or this is done within an individual student problem solving meeting. The most important thing is that there's a team involved in this, really analyzing that data and analyzing the intervention, and that whole group of students' performance. And then the individual student, we just really want to caution folks as we roll the system out that we stay true to what we believe, which is what we believe is that everything that we do with students should be based on a team approach, not one sad, lonely teacher being responsible for one more thing in her classroom or his classroom. So as you're going through this, let's think about this in terms of the team is answering this first question. Is the student's trend line indicating they'll meet their goal by the intervention end date? So the trend line would populate on there. So we could see that pretty easily. Then is the student generalizing the skills of the intervention to other settings? So this is where we really want you to be thinking about not losing your mind over one time series graph, but really thinking through how is the student building these skills into the other settings that they're involved in. So you would answer yes or no, that team would. Are most other students in the same intervention showing a positive response? So again, we would have that group performance information that would be on that plan page, so we could look to see what's the percentage of kids that are showing a positive response. We'd answer yes or no. And then do other measures of student progress in addition to this graph indicate that the student's progressing with the intervention. So remember, throughout our Module 2 training, we talk about kind of using a matrix of problem solving or progress monitoring measures to determine response. So we really want you to think about not just this things that are appropriate for graphed data, like curriculum-based measures, but also thinking through how's the student responding on the intervention embedded assessments that we use. Are they learning the content that we're instructing them on over time? How are they doing in the classroom and anecdotal data? How are they doing on all those other measures that we talk about? So you can see when we select those answers, there's some logic built into the back of the system based on some decision making that we want you to have. So you can see we say yes, no, yes, yes. So depending on these answers, when Amy hits Save Plan Review, then a recommendation will populate right where Amy's cursor is under Plan Review. So it was reviewed on March 27th. And based on the answers to those questions, it populates with either poor response, questionable response, or positive response. And right now it's populating with questionable response because remember, even though that student in our imaginary case, we indicated that they were making progress on this graph data, that they were, the other students in the group were responding, but what we didn't say was that we weren't sure if that student was generalizing. And so if they're not generalizing the skills of the intervention, that's going to automatically come out as a questionable response. So those questions are set up in such a way that we want you to really think through that student's individual progress and that group progress before you make a decision about, is the student responding.
Okay. So in a pilot, we're having to create a document outside of the early warning system, but when we do rollout in the fall, winter, and spring, the create document button will be the way that folks will create their documents for individual students. And just as a reminder, creating a document does not mean that that is the official plan. The official plan happens when you click on Finalize Plan. So the system saves the information. It's part of the student's history. That's when it's official. Creating the document is just a way for folks to actually be able to have it official for a parent or guardian, or if you're wanting to have a document in front of you for a particular PLC meeting. So we're on the early warning page, and we can always go back to the early warning page at any time. That's my default. And so when we're there, we're back to where we were. We're in the MTSS demo classroom. Think of it as like homeroom for fourth graders. And then we have ways to get to individual students and different parts of the system that house information for individual students. And one place is documents page. So on the documents, when you click on documents, what we're getting is the individual students page. And we know that it's an individual students page by a couple of reasons. One, we have the name Angel up here. That's the student's name. The other way that we know it's an individual student page is because we have information up here at the second menu page. And so depending on a user's association with students, you may or may not have this information up here. So when I click on the early warning system, we have the intervention plan. So when you click on intervention plan, we're going to be able to create a document. So right now we'll just create a file document. And part of what we want to do is indicate whether or not we want only the literacy plan that we just worked on, or if you want all plans that were created for that student. So we'll just start off with just the intervention. So who's the plan contact for the student? These are the adults in the building that have an association with the students' current groups. So these are folks that have access to the intervention planning, to providing interventions. They might be somebody that it might be the school principal. It's definitely the classroom teachers there, but it also might be like a facilitator or coach in the building or that interventionist. So right now, they can contact me, but you might also understand that Amy Miller and the Gen Ed test are going to be the folks that are also part of the team. In this case, we want to just answer the question, have the parents or guardians been made aware of the interventions listed? Yes or no? And then are there additional changes in the intervention plan needed for this particular student? And we use the word individual student because remember, most of our plans in the system are going to be group plans. And we can make notes in here if we wanted to. That would print on the document. Actually, I probably could have just create file document. I did not need to hit save. So now we have a link to a PDF, and when we click on that link, we have the document for that particular student. It gives us the information that we just filled out. We only have the literacy plan that's with the interventions. We have the goal for that student. We have the graphing for that student. And then now we have the intervention graph that was mentioned that is going to be not only in the document but also on the interface. In this case, because we didn't do a lot of logging for these 3 students in this short time that we've had today, we have a graph that says 100% of the students don't have data for us to understand whether or not things are going on. But in this case, most of the students are not showing a positive response, mostly because we don't have enough data. We have the information from the plan review, and we have the date of that plan review. So this document will take in the last plan review. You can do a plan review at any time during the life of the plan, but the document will only print the last plan that's been reviewed. And then the last thing that I like about this particular document is that the standard protocol strategies were used with this plan. So you know that we'd want you to use your intervention matrix to be able to provide those standard treatment protocols. The document actually says if it's a custom plan or it's a plan from the standard protocol. So that's evidence there. Just another place for the data.
The other thing I really like about this is when you have to, you put in some notes around, are there additional changes or anything needed for that student? That would be a great place if the student is moving from school to school to, again, keep track of where exactly the student is in that particular curriculum, intervention curriculum. So it would be a nice place to say, this student left off on unit blah, and this is how they were progressing. So that's always been a missing link, I think, for us to have some continuity across intervention for students that may move. So this would be a nice place to do that, to document that. And there's some other notes sections you could document that, I think, for the individual student, but this would be a good way to use the software to start having better practice around continuing interventions for students across various schools and settings.
So if we were to look at a plan for Angel, let's just say that we need to not look at the data here, but move her to a new plan. What it allows us to do when you click on that button, a pop-up screen shows up, and it gives us a list of all of the plans that are currently available based on the particular user that's actually adding this. And so not only do you have a list of these plans, there's one also that you can create a new literacy plan for Angel. So in order to create a new literacy plan, we'll just do that next, and we'll go in, and we're going to definitely in that current plan, just as a reminder, letting you know, hey, they're still on there, and we're going to make it more intensive. And just because it's more intensive doesn't mean you can't use a standard treatment protocol. So what we're going to do is go in and use a standard protocol for that intensive plan for this one student. And so when we go in, we say, okay, now we're going to have the date. It's going to start today. Notice the frequency and durations changed. Again, this is based on what the LEAs give us. And yet the standard progress monitoring tool is the same as the diagnostic tool, teacher-made assessment. So now down here, you only have one student, and you can put the baseline date. And if we still put the baseline date, if it's the same one, then we'll be able to look at how we're going to do this. So I forget the target date. We're still going to make it for the 30th. I'm going to go up here, check out instructional practices. We're going to do some modifications in the environment, and then we hit Analyze Plan. So now we have a plan just for Angel. It's more intensive. Notice that because it's the same progress monitoring tool, information's been logged already, so we have that information there.
And then if you scroll all the way down, you can just modify this one plan, correct?
Yep, you can go in here and modify that. So this modification plan shows up for group plans and for individuals. So a couple of different ways to know if a student has a plan. The easiest way is to look at whether or not the symbol is open. So notice that here it's a closed F, and then now you have an open I, for instance, the plan. Attendance, none of these attendance, remember we're not making plans for attendance, so there's never going to be an open symbol. But with behavior, there is a plan for behavior for Amy. Rhonda, there's a plan over here for math because it's open. And then you have like the red octagons for folks that have an indicator that needs more intensive support. But another way to know whether or not a student has a plan, or in the previous plans, is just to look under student information. So this is an expansion column. I'm going to click on the caret. And if I want to pin plans, because I want to focus in on just whether or not they have a plan or not, if I click it twice, then it pops up all of the folks that have plans. Just yes here. Some of these folks might have an IEP. And I don't think any of these do, but if they did, you could also see it here. We have a second expansion plans. I'm going to go to Caitlin Test in a different classroom. And under the caret for the name of the student, when we click on student profile, this is where all of the data is consolidated into one area. And most of this data is coming from PowerSchool. There might be some third-party data in here. I think if I was to look under performance data, you'll see that. But under personal information, this is information coming in from PowerSchool. And the grouped information are the classes that the student is in that particular school, as well as any class that's been, or any group that's been created for that student. So maybe if they're in a watch group, in the training, we made some kind of crazy names of groups, but this particular kid is in a class that's in a watch group for folks that need to come to school. So they're having some issues with attendance. Performance data, again, this is based on school year. So if we were to look at some historical information from last year, we could go back, and it brings in 2016-17 data for these particular assessments. I can go back to the current school year. It changes that information. We are bringing in final grades from PowerSchool. I don't think the student has any. We're bringing in attendance. Again, the code will always be absent because we're not bringing in reasons, because it doesn't matter why a student is not in class. If they're not in class, they're missing instruction. Academic just shows the list of all the plans that the folks that the student is on, and then if the student is special ed, there'd be a link right here to the IEP added plan or the current IEP document. So a classroom teacher then has instant access to the accommodations or goals for students with disabilities. So it's just one way to look at a lot of information about one particular student. So if you wanted to do a deep dive after looking at the whole school and the grade level and the classroom, now you can do a deep dive on individual students as well.
So I think we've talked through, so of course, 5, 6, and 7, as Angie pointed out earlier, that these are done throughout that team process. So we want the different user capabilities and user roles that are within the system. We would expect a school leadership team to first look to see how's the whole school progressing, and then give it down to that next level team, which a lot of times is the PLC, to look to see how their whole grade level or content area is progressing. And then kind of determine what we need to do as a whole grade level, and then thinking about intensifications to core number 8. And then we went through in the system, scroll down to number 9. Then we go through the team determines the supplemental intervention match. And then there may be some students as well that need to determine if need immediate intensive intervention. So that may also take place there. And then on the right-hand side, we also talked about how we can try to start determining that intervention effectiveness. So looking across that group to see how they're progressing, and what Amy hasn't gone through that we'll continue to have these conversations with you is you can also look across at certain user types across all the interventions that are being conducted to see if certain interventions are having the benefit that we want for large groups of students. So we want to look first at how effective that intervention is for that group of kids, but then we'll also be able to look to see how effective that intervention is in general across our school or across our district. So it's got a lot of capability. We think that you're going to be very happy with all of these pieces, and we'll continue to have more conversations as we go forward. And your regional consultants are always available to ask, to answer questions for you, get answers for you.